Good morning and welcome to the Partnership for Public Service. I'm Katie Maleg, the Partnership's Vice President for Government Effectiveness, and it's really a delight to welcome all of you here today for a discussion about how artificial intelligence may affect the federal government and what agencies can do to prepare. As you may know, the Partnership for Public Service is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that strives for a more effective federal government. And one way we pursue that goal is through initiatives that focus on innovation and technology like artificial intelligence. And the partnership and the IBM Center for the Business of Government have been focusing on this topic for about 2 years now. In January 2018, we released a report entitled, "The Future Has Begun, Using Artificial Intelligence to Transform Government." And today, we jointly release More Than Meets AI, Part 1 and Part 2. In Part 1, we highlight how AI might affect the federal workforce, from changing the federal workday to putting technical skills front and center. In Part 2, we provide recommendations for how today's federal agencies can address and mitigate AI's challenges, such as bias, security, transparency, employee knowledge about AI technology, and federal budget and procurement processes. These white papers are based on 4 roundtable discussions and a series of interviews we conducted over the past year. And as I begin, I'd like to especially thank our collaborators from the IBM Center for the Business of Government, Dan, Claude, and Tatiana, and especially my partnership colleagues, Peter, Jamie, and Ellen. I'd especially thank Peter for his leadership on this effort. As I look around the room, I suspect some of you remember record players. You know, the thing that played an LP. For the music fans among us, that technology evolved into the 8-track tape. Just for a few days, but into the 8-track tape. Then the cassette tape, the Walkman, the CD, the iPod, until all the music I could ever want was accessible on my cell phone. And with the benefit of artificial intelligence, I now have an app that not only provides the music I want, but it tells me what music I want. Think about that trajectory. Over a fairly brief period of time, dramatic changes in technology enhanced by AI, and its effects on customers, on the workforce, and on processes. So artificial intelligence has great potential to improve how we listen to music, and also, much more powerfully, how the government works. AI can increase operational efficiency and effectiveness. It can free employees from repetitive tasks, uncover new data insights, and enhance service delivery to customers. While taking advantage of the opportunities AI presents, agency leaders will also have to manage the challenges that arise from the disruption AI brings. Employees will need new technical and social skills, and it will be crucial for agencies to provide those. Agencies will also need to address concerns the public and their own employees will have about AI, including answering questions around job impact and the risks such as bias, transparency, and security. Today's discussion will include a few examples of how agencies are using AI, and we also hope to hear from you about other examples of how your organizations are using AI. So thanks again for joining us for this discussion. I'm pleased now to introduce Susan Wedge, Vice President and Partner for U.S. Public Sector at IBM Global Business Services, who will provide a brief overview of the report we released today. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you, and I'd also like to welcome you today and thank the Partnership for Public Service for both hosting us here for the discussion and for the collaboration over the last 2 years that Katie mentioned that really drove the research that's a part of these reports. I'd like to thank the government leaders in the room who will share those perspectives and provide those examples today. So with us we have Suzette Kent, who is the Federal CIO with the Office of Management and Budget, Dorothy Aronson, the CIO for National Science Foundation, Ed Simcox, the CTO at the Department of Health and Human Services, Andrea Bright, the Chico for Customs and Border Protection, and Dan Chenik, our Executive Director for the IBM Center for the Business of Government. As Katie mentioned, the foundation for this research was a series of roundtables and interviews, and with many of you are in the room. So I'd like to thank you for your inputs and your participation as well. I'm Susan Wedge. As Katie mentioned, I'm with our IBM Services organization, and put simply, I lead the team of consultants that's responsible for working with government agencies to effectively and efficiently adopt AI to deliver both new experiences and new outcomes. The global workforce is changing rapidly. Artificial intelligence will change 100% of jobs in the next decade. And if the government is to get the most benefit from AI, the way in which work is done also needs to change. For the first research report that we released with the partnership, government experts and leaders spoke about the fact that the initial benefit of AI will be around the automation of administrative tasks. That's where many of the agencies are starting. Over time, this automation will expand to minimizing the times workers spend on those repetitive tasks, and which will allow agencies to spend more time on their core missions. As Katie mentioned, for this implementation to be successful, the workforce will have to be reskilled by prioritizing the technical, the digital, the data literacy skills in a time when we need to impact all workers. Training the workers in the workforce is not age or experience specific. We need to transform all of us in order to be able to use this technology most effectively. That type of change is going to require the ardent support of leaders from across government, including many of you who are in the room today. As Katie mentioned, the More Than Meets AI report, the second report that we're releasing today, we dove into how to capture the benefits from AI while also managing risk, and doing those things together to build the trust both of the federal workforce as well as the federal constituents that are served by each of our agencies. The challenges of addressing bias and security drive concerns regarding risk. Bias can be mitigated through training employees to interpret data, identify inaccuracies, and ensuring that the data that's being used is clean and complete in the first place. Security can be addressed through human monitoring of integrity and constantly testing for those vulnerabilities. With the ability to accomplish tasks more quickly and more accurately, transparency is also essential in understanding how decisions are made. With clarity about how AI produces its recommendations and explainable methods for how agencies have come to those conclusions, trust can be maintained. With the proper management of risk and the constant assurance of public trust driven by government leaders, agencies can use AI to solve some of the problems that are not yet solvable. I look forward to today's discussion, and I welcome Katie back to the stage.
Thank you, Susan. It's really an honor today to have Suzette Kent, the Federal Chief Information Officer, to provide opening remarks. I suspect with this crowd, she doesn't need much of an introduction, but I'm going to provide one anyway. Suzette is an industry leader of large-scale business transformation using technology for the world's most complex organizations, but what is more complex than the federal government? Prior to joining OMB, Suzette served as a principal at EY, a partner at Accenture, consulting president at Caraker Corporation, and a managing director at JP Morgan. Although technology change has been at the core of her professional career, retooling the workforce and creating new opportunities for people have been essential elements of the efforts she's led. Suzette is a frequent speaker in global industry forums and other events, and we're delighted that this is the second time she has joined the IBM Center and the partnership to speak about artificial intelligence. So, Suzette, thank you for being here today. We really look forward to hearing your remarks on this topic.
Good morning, and I am glad to be back on this topic. This is actually one of my favorite topics, and Katie started with, we're having a discussion about what may, and I'm actually going to talk about what is changing, how we deliver government services right now, and actually how we do the business of government. I was happy to be here the first time, and in our first discussion, we spent a lot of time talking about how we start, and those are some of the things that you actually see covered in the two components of the study. What I want to talk about today, and as a tee up to our fantastic panelists, is what's happening right now, kind of a point-in-time glimpse. And the concept of artificial intelligence has been a primary focus of this administration, executive orders. We talk about budgeting priorities, the Select Committee on AI, a national AI R&D strategy, lots of things. But many of those were outward facing. That was about our industry and about the industry in our country and about how we compete in the world in this space. This is an exciting discussion because this is what we do with it internally and how we use those same capabilities to better serve citizens and inside the agencies, what it means. And when, in our last conversation, it was, as I said, kind of forward-looking and what might happen. The analogy of the progression of music is comparable, but we're moving incredibly faster, at a much more lightning pace. And even in that first discussion to today, you're going to hear real examples of what's being done across many agencies. And the recommendations that were in there, we're actually doing a lot of those already. So there are success stories to share. And I want to drill a little bit deeper on the workforce implications and then where we're going on responsible and ethical use of AI. Every single agency, in my role, I get to work with every single agency, and what is exciting is there is not a single agency that's not doing something. Where they're starting is a little bit different, and I'm going to talk about that, and what they're doing is different. But there are real impacts and real success stories, and we have to actually scale some of the infrastructure and the skills to be able to keep that journey going. Some of the places that we're starting are the easy things. And the journey now is to the much more difficult things. So there's been much progress, and there's a lot to talk about today, but we need to continue to refine our thinking, not only on the processes that we target, but how we collaborate in not just using the automation capabilities for repetitive tasks and components of tasks, but really changing the entire business processes end to end and our service models. So when we start on this journey, it is also informing another very important part of the work that all agencies are doing, and as part of our federal data strategy, is that not only do we need skills, but we need to make some major foundational investments in data. And you see those kind of going side by side. So these starting points, these success stories, they're informing the needed skills, whether that's technical skills in some of the actual automation technologies themselves, data skills, operational skills, control environment, and how we explain to citizens as we use these capabilities more broadly, what's in the data and what we're doing. Those are muscles that we haven't quite exercised in the same way. I'm going to talk about transparency and explainability a little bit more. So a couple of things that we're seeing now. So AI and related types of automation. So whether we're talking RPA, natural language processing, analytics, and I want to compare this to the thing, right now it's not driving loss of jobs. Not driving loss of jobs. It's driving more valuable work. And it's actually showing us where we need to make more investments in skills. In almost every agency, what you will hear them say is, yes, we are starting with the manual repetitive tasks. We know that. But those same individuals are now doing more value-added work. That aligns with shifting low-value to high-value work, but it also means the things that we're asking our employees to do are more complex. And those need different types of measurements. They need different types of skills in many cases. I would also put forth, and I'll challenge you to ask the folks who are going to speak later, in many cases, those employees are much happier because the work they're doing is a lot more interesting. So it aligns with the hypothesis that was in the report out and the suggested point. But what as we were preparing for this, I was sharing with some of the team, we're also seeing something a little different happen. And I want to put this out as a challenge for everyone. Going in for those manual tasks, that's happening almost across the board. And we're seeing success stories, and those things are very easy to monitor and measure from a control environment. The other place we're seeing is the leapfrog into the big complex questions, places that we can use data and we can use analytical capabilities, whether it's artificial intelligence or machine learning, to help us identify patterns, draw conclusions, and aggregate things in really big data sets. And I'm going to call this work, I'm making an analogy here for purpose, kind of at the top line. Work that has not been done before. Work that does not have an existing infrastructure. And in many cases, exciting. Where we're making a little bit slower progress is somewhat in the middle. And in the middle is where we have to cross many silos. It's easy to automate a manual task. But when you significantly change a business process, you have to look at the human resource. You have to look at how we engage with customers. You have to look at how we collect data and what the regulatory environment, looks like for how we're collecting it and what we're using or how we're using it. We have to retrain a broader swath of employees. The work in the middle that really changes the business process and the service delivery is the tougher work. That's also the place where being able to be transparent and explainable is more important. And we have to build the mechanisms for the right type of data inspection, the right type of oversight, and how we share what we're doing with the citizens that we're serving, and we share it in a way that makes sense with them. So I'm going to tell you couple things that we're doing to go at that, and I'm going to share some examples. As we talked about last time, and part of my discussion is that we are developing policy to serve as guideposts for how federal agencies use AI, and that includes controls and expected examination responsibilities, both of data and what's in the algorithms, so that we're starting with safety and we're starting with careful thought. But the challenge that we're still trying to solve for, and as part of our collective journey, is how do we achieve that transparency and explainability? As the use cases move from the manual tasks to that middle and the higher end, where we are closer to delivery of services to citizens and decisions about things that we do that have more human impact, we have to have a mechanism for explaining and being transparent that is different. Very different than what we have today. So, example, right? Take it down to what are we doing at the agencies? And you may hear some of these stories. If we use AI to identify potential errors or fraud in monetary transactions, that's pretty explainable, right? We know how that was supposed to go. We have a RPA community of interest that's being led by the CFO community that has almost 400 individuals self-selected. They joined to help target those processes. That control environment's pretty easy. But when we have to explain the construct of a complex decision with many different data sets, that changes the paradigm. I know Ed and I were talking about this, and we have a bunch of folks from HHS, and I'll use a tiny example of one of the pilots. We were doing a simulation on looking at data in the opioids crisis, and what we were trying to figure out is when you look at all the factors that might influence that, how do you have maximum impact? Where would you put the resources? So when you have to look at the interaction of prescription drug levels and law enforcement, availability of mental health treatment, income levels, what might be going on in a particular region, and draw conclusions about what's most impactful, that needs a different kind of transparency and explainability. There's a much higher level of responsibility around understanding the data and the relationship and how those outcomes are driven. Those are the places where our next steps and our focus has to be. Let's get the easy stuff, and agencies are doing a phenomenal job at that. But how do we move on to the next piece? So if we continue to use automated tools in areas like this to drive decision making, the responsibilities for accuracy and bias-free data and transparency of construction of the analysis requires a much more significant approach. The other area that's front and center, and so that is an area where you will continue to see more work, and we need a lot of public-private engagement. I'm even watching some of the discussions that are going on in cities and the reaction of certain citizens to what the city is doing and what they share and how they interpret that. And that's a place where understanding the mission and the audience that you're talking with is very, very important. How we might explain something to a group of scientists and what's explainable in that population is very different from how we might explain why someone was chosen to receive a food supplement benefit. So that is a set of skills. When we talk about skills building, again, beyond the technical, beyond the data disciplines, the next step in how we interact with the citizens that we're serving. The other area where there's a lot more work to do is in the security area. And this ranges from just primary research for what's going on in the artificial intelligence, whether that is at the device level, or it is at software level, or it's in the data collection devices. We talk about you talk about Internet of Things, but there is a incredibly complex environment now from which we are collecting data. And the security question is in the data collection, the analysis, the use, and the explainability. It runs through the entire process, and those are things that we need to continue to explain, or we need to continue to explore, whether it's at the device level, the data gathering, the way in which data is managed, and we have to up those as we share data more broadly. That's an objective of the federal data strategy, more broad sharing. That's definitely an objective of the agencies. Some of the most exciting work and the best collaboration that I'm seeing going on between agencies is when they are sharing data to solve a complex problem, but they might also tell you some stories that aren't so fun around how long it takes to share that data. But in sharing, we also have to look at the security, increase that level of security and privacy as we go on that journey. And those are questions that we are asking and working through right now at the agencies because this is moving so quickly. I would pose one other thing. I think that the outcomes and the conclusions and suggestions that were in the last report are very much spot on, and we are seeing actions on almost every one of them. But one other reason that we have to be very thoughtful around how we enact the actions around transparency, privacy, and security, and what we decide inside the federal government is important for model examination and the engagement model with citizens, is that these may actually set the standards for some sectors and some areas. There's many areas where this is new, but it's moving so quickly. And as we take steps to introduce controls and examination processes, those may be adopted and used very quickly. So it's very incumbent on us to be thoughtful about those and have robust dialogues that represent, industry, academia, and the citizens that we're serving in those areas to ensure that we get it right. So I'm going to close to thank you for everyone who is actually working in this space. It is one of the most transformative areas that we are working on right now. We're doing a lot across the technology community, but this is something that has the opportunity to fundamentally change how we deliver services to citizens to drive efficiency. So when we go back to the mission, service, and stewardship, this is a home run. But we have to get it right. We have to have that level of attention. I thank the partnership, IBM, the federal leaders here today who stay engaged in this. And this is a place where learning fast and collaborating is very, very important. And you're going to hear from some fantastic leaders who are doing that. I have the pleasure of working with them every day. But it's important that we're taking the learnings from these agencies and bringing them back to the center and using that to make our collective approach better and to move at a pace that does represent global leadership. So thank you for the opportunity to open up today. I know it's going to be a fantastic dialogue. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you very much, Suzette, for your leadership, for those inspiring remarks. You've provided a great frame for the government to move forward, and we appreciate that. I also want to thank Katie for introducing to the partnership for a fantastic collaborative process over the last 2 years. We hope this will continue into the future in many different ways, and we look forward to that. Also, thanks to Peter, who has really been the quarterback for this whole effort, and to our IBM team. Susan, thank you for your remarks. Claude Eusti, Tatiana Sokolova, Elena Kennedy, others who are here in the room who have been with the process through the entire set. And of course, most of all, the government leaders. Suzette, you talked about bringing the learnings together. We've had through these roundtables, government leaders, academic experts, colleagues in industry and the nonprofit community come together and identify the challenges that you are seeing in the two reports. And today's dialogue will really elucidate what those challenges look like in practice at 3 agencies by 3 tremendous leaders. Before I introduce them, just a quick note about the Center for the Business of Government, in case some of you have not worked or seen the center before. We are a research organization within IBM. We're independent of the business. We work with academic experts and nonprofit experts in the US and around the world on addressing topics and challenges that are top of mind to governments, ranging from technology to management to harnessing innovation. And we produce probably about a dozen reports a year. We've been around for 20 years, and we hope to see you 20 years from now as we continue to help governments move forward. So we're really looking forward to today's panel. Can I ask the panel to come up and join us here? And I'll just do a quick introduction. Susan introduced them earlier, so I'll just again introduce, starting from my left, Andrea Bright, who is the Assistant Commissioner of the Office of Human Resources Management for Enterprise Services at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and was formerly the Chief Human Capital Officer at OPM, so brings a 2-agency perspective. Dorothy Aronson, the Chief Information Officer at the National Science Foundation, a long career at NSF, preceded by experience at DARPA. So again, sort of bringing multiple agency perspectives. And Ed Simcox, the Chief Technology Officer at HHS. Ed has had a long time career as a successful leader of technology in the private sector, so brings that perspective as well. And we're going to start off just by asking each of our panelists to talk a little bit about their role at the agency and how their role relates to artificial intelligence and implementation. Ed, can you kick us off?
Sure. Am I on? So I am the Chief Technology Officer, and for a while, for I think 9 months, I also served as the Acting Chief Information Officer at HHS, and that was a fantastic opportunity for me to understand kind of the operations, the regulatory environment in which we have to operate federal IT, and also had the wonderful opportunity to go testify regarding oversight of IT. In front of Congress, and it was a great opportunity. My background is I went to law school. I'm a recovering attorney. I haven't found the 12-step program for that yet, but it was kind of like studying for the bar, going in front of Congress, and understanding all of the nuance and the intricacies associated with best practices around good IT, I took a lot of that as we were designing some of the training, internal education things that we do around IT. So we have an internal program called Data Science CoLab that we run. And the whole idea there is to make people more fluent in the basic language of data and data science and AI. People that probably work with data casually in their jobs, but are very interested. They have an appetite to begin to use data in a more meaningful way in a day-to-day basis and understand what that means. So we run this program, and there are the first cohort we had, which was last year. We put out just an informal call to some listservs internally and through email, and we had 200 people sign up for it, and I think we had 70 seats available. The second time that we did the same kind of outreach. We had 800 people at from across all of our agencies. So, step back, HHS, largest civilian agency, 80,000 full-time employees, 100,000 contractors at any given time. In the organization, you have Food and Drug Administration, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, you have Medicare and Medicaid, the National Institutes of Health, et cetera. And the people in these classes are from all across HHS. So I report to the secretary. I sit in the immediate office of the secretary, and that gives us kind of an umbrella, a wide lens view across what's going on. And this type of training, I think, is really, really important. And the whole idea is we're taking a very, like a crawl, walk, run approach to AI and to data science to get people more fluent in data and understanding what AI is. And part of that training is teaching people about three things: privacy, security, and the fiduciary responsibility that we have to taxpayers or patients regarding their personal data that's protected by many sets of legislation and regulation, the most important and most visible of which is HIPAA. And there are serious privacy concerns around where we do not identify, we're not allowed to identify people and surface data about personal data about people while we use their identities. So built into this education is a lot around those three things, but also just generally how can people use AI, how can people use data to meet their missions and their business goals inside. So that's just an example of some of the stuff that my office is involved with.
Thank you, Ed. Dorothy?
Good morning. Hello. I'm Dorothy Aronson. I'm the Chief Information Officer at the National Science Foundation, and I've been recently, and also the Chief Privacy Officer. Unlike Ed, NSF is this tiny organization, about 1,200 people, one location, so I have a very easy job, but it's like a petri dish. I'm also Chief Data Officer now, so I'm learning all about data. If anyone has any other titles they'd like to throw my way, go right ahead. So our adventure with artificial intelligence started maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, where, and I started, actually, NSF is working on both of those directions that Suzette pointed out. We have some people doing bots in the financial area, and that's one kind of level of problem. But where I started was with a big problem. And I want to emphasize that we started with a problem that was in an unknown territory, one of those. And what we did was, and here's a thing that I'm not sure quite how to say this, but I'm a recovering accountant. I don't believe that IT people should be leading this charge. And the reason for that is because artificial intelligence requires the intelligence of the business. And so if the business people are not, if the people doing the work are not the ones leading the effort, we can't go very far. And if we engage them as the leaders, then it's easy. Then adoption is easy, training is easy, all of these other things if others own it from the beginning and we are the facilitators. So that's my experience. And what we did at NSF was we were very fortunate. There was a huge problem that looked like it could be solved with data. It was a time-consuming task that was being done by the researchers. And we got some researchers together who agreed that it was a big problem. They did not agree on how to solve the problem. They agreed it was a big problem, and they agreed that data could help. And together, this team of program officers, which is the name of the scientists at NSF, said, yes, we want to solve this problem. And we tried a lot of different ways, and we called those things micro projects. We tried all different kinds of tiny experiments, like, does the data exist that we can that we could use to solve this problem? How can we find it? So each tiny success that brought us closer to understanding how to solve the problem led us to an artificial intelligence solution that was very easy to implement technology-wise. The technology is there. Businesses got all kinds of tools out there. They're free on the internet often. The data, that once we identified it, it existed. We had to clean it up. We had to make it machine understandable. With respect to the privacy issues and, let's see, that's not the right, ethics. There was definitely a question of ethics and bias in the data because when you use existing data, it is bias. It is by nature. It wasn't developed to be non-bias. This is a new thing. So what we did to accommodate the bias was we explained to them, if you use this solution, you are going to encounter and have to, as an intelligent being, counter the bias that this program is going to give you. Over time, it becomes more accurate. But initially, you have to be very aware of what those biases are. And then we had to conquer the people problem, which is, this is a big problem. If we solve it, there will be staff impacted. There will be, of course, there'll be program officers who are delighted because they have to do less work, or it's easier to do their job, but there's also people supporting them in this task, and those people will be affected. So the third prong, in addition to technology and data, the third prong we attacked right from the beginning was the people. Not just the people who are doing the technology and the people who are doing the actual program officer type work, but the people, what do we do? How do we replace the work that's being, what do we want to do with the people? What do we want to do with the people who will be impacted? That was the absolute hardest part of the problem, and we failed to solve it. So although we solved the rest, the main learning from that problem was we have to be more aggressive about fixing the people problems. And so what was born from that learning was the notion of this competition we're running called the Career Compass Challenge. And what that says is it's an attempt, challenge.gov. You're too late to enter. The submissions are due on Friday. But the notion is, is it possible to use artificial intelligence to build an app or something like that that would, given a tiny bit of information about you, maybe bits of your resume, maybe your personality profile, and given information about what we believe might be emerging jobs 5 years from now, not things that are posted in USA Jobs now. If we knew something about the future and could predict the future, and if we knew something about you, could we offer you the opportunity to begin to see your future path? And could this app feed up training opportunities and detail opportunities and such for you? And so just having that vision and conversation has been really liberating for us, in that often we talk about the future as if it's incredibly vague and we don't know where we're really going, but it's something like this. But the app gave people I don't know, like the sword and the stone. It gave a substantial thing that people could look at and say, I think if that's the vision, how do I build to that vision? And we've gotten a tremendous response, and it's been a very positive experience, and that's all I have to say about me, unless you want to hear more. Okay.
Thank you, Dorothy. Andrea.
Good morning. I probably look at this from a slightly different perspective as an HR professional. I do see a few of my HR colleagues out there, so yay, HR folks. I was thinking as you were talking about when I first started hearing about artificial intelligence, and for me, this goes back, I would say 10 or 15 years in the HR realm when we were talking about hiring, and one of the first applications that I started hearing about was one of the things that we're always looking for when we're hiring people is individuals who are able to write, right? That's always one of the challenges. We need people who can write well in the federal government. And we spend a lot of time, or we used to, rating people's essays. And so we were looking at how we could use what at the time was called latent semantic analysis to feed in essays that had already been rated into an artificial intelligence tool so that we could train the tool to then rate these essays later, because we just spend a lot of time in the HR offices rating people's essays and having, frankly, subject matter experts do that type of work. So it's been a really long evolution. It's something that we've been talking about in HR, and something that we probably haven't grabbed hold of as solidly as a lot of other areas. I am relatively new to CBP. I've been at CBP for about 2 months, so I'm still in a little bit of a transition phase. But I've learned a little bit about how we are using artificial intelligence at CBP. And I would say a couple of things. One is, from a workforce perspective, we really intend to use artificial intelligence to free our employees up to do the work that we actually hired and trained them to do. We aren't intending to reduce our workforce, and we really don't think that we will have surplus employees as a result. What we think we will have is, for example, Border Patrol agents who are able to focus on their law enforcement activities instead of monitoring videos where we're we have cameras that monitor the border, and right now we have individual Border Patrol agents who are monitoring those cameras. And so our goal is to establish artificial intelligence tools that will set flags that will help to signal to those Border Patrol agents if it's a car, if it's a person, or if it's an animal, if it's a cow. And so instead of having people do that, which is what we have been doing, we are moving towards automating some of that activity that allows the Border Patrol agents to do the work that they want to do. So getting back to having employees who are more satisfied, that's what they want to do. They want to be doing their law enforcement mission, and so we believe that artificial intelligence will help us get there. Another initiative that we have is we're working with the DHS Science and Technology Directorate, the U.S. Postal Service, and some other federal agencies to improve our what we call non-intrusive detection systems that are monitoring international mail that's coming into the United States to help us to identify illicit drugs that are being trafficked into the United States via the mail system. And so if we can improve the way that we monitor that, that will help us all to coming back to the opioid crisis, some of that challenge for the United States. So there are a lot of opportunities for the way that we use it. The other thing I would note is obviously one of the challenges is in communication to our workforce. And one of the things that we've done at CBP is we recently issued our 2020 to 25 strategic initiatives. And we've identified 3 critical goals for the organization. And this predates me, but I am thrilled to see what they did. We have 3 goals. The first is mission, the second is team, and the third is future. And within each of those, we have specific strategic initiatives. So what we've done is place our workforce up front as one of the 3 most important things for CBP. So we're sending a message that we care about our workforce and we want to ensure that they remain a priority for the organization. And embedded within the mission and the future components of our strategies, we have a lot of technology. One of the key strategies under the future is data analytics. We've all been hearing about it, but for us, we have tons of data. And to the extent that we can better mine that data, it enables us to do our mission better. So we're really using our strategic initiatives and our strategic plan as a key communication tool for our workforce to let them know what our priorities are.
Thank you, Andrea. And you all talked about AI as a mission enabler, much more than a technology in each of your different spaces, which was a key finding from the research that we did as well in terms of its promise. If you think about, and Suzette commented on moving from sort of the basic automation of common repetitive tasks up into more of the business process space. If you think about steps you can take to help agencies understand how best to move up that stack, what are some actions that you've seen be successful, which may range from policy to workforce training to new ways to collaborate with industry or academia? Are there steps that agencies can take as a practical matter to help them move into the mission space with AI?
Yeah, so I mentioned some of the training that we do. We also have an intake process, and we do a lot of outreach to the mission-based parts of our organization on this very thing. I think a lot of times AI it's a hammer looking for a nail, and I think the kind of the most blatant example of that in our current cycle of technology is blockchain. Everyone talks about blockchain as a panacea and it's going to help, but with AI, we get into some of that as well. And AI has been around, folks. For those of us that don't know kind of the history, it's been around since the 60s in some form or another, right? Artificial intelligence. And there are different things, supervised learning, unsupervised learning, deep learning, machine learning. There are, different parts of it. But people seem to gravitate towards shiny objects. Even the folks that are mission-based and leaders inside of the mission space, they hear what the great things that we're doing around AI across federal government, and they say, I think we might need some of that, right? So what we do is we try and rationalize the process by bringing folks into our office and saying, what problems are you trying to solve? You know, always have to go back to that question. The other thing that we do is when folks say, hey, I think we may need AI, or we say, yeah, you're right, you know, this calls for maybe some robotic process automation or some AI. We then sit down with them and we pair people up. We take technicians, if you will, who are really good at development, you know, technical development, and we pair them with people in the operations of the mission part of the organization. So the idea of DevOps, right? A developer with an operator, if you will, in the business, that is super important. You have to start that process from the very beginning if you're going to be successful in executing on an AI project. So we spend a lot of time talking about that. We don't call it DevOps because, again, I think that's a little cliche, and it means different things to different people. But it's always important to the first few minutes of the first meeting that we have with folks is around what problems are we trying to solve here. And we nail that to the wall first and foremost. And then you got to go back to that on a regular basis and make sure you maintain focus on that. And if you do, you're going to have a greater rate of success in implementing technology down the road. The other thing I'll tell you that we're really focused on is people, process, and technology, in that order. And Suzette hit on this a couple times in her remarks. You have to start with people. You have to go to the people and understand them, where they sit and where they are and what's important to them. And this goes with whether they're fearful about their jobs being eliminated with AI, or if they are interested in using AI. We have to figure out how what is the corporate culture, the government culture like in that part of the organization, what kind of tools and everything might be available that are a good fit for that. Process, Suzette hit on that middle layer, right? It's kind of the boring, hard layer of what we do. I mean, we all know about some quick hit projects that we've seen in our agencies, right? And then, as Suzette said, we also know about the cool, sexy things that we're doing that are really advanced, you know, using supercomputing architecture and neural networks and the national laboratories and things of that nature. Great work. But the meat exists in that middle layer, and it involves process work, and it involves policy work, and it involves the ethics work. And so you have to take things in a stepwise fashion. You can't push the easy button. You have to be very calculated about this. And if you're formulaic and calculated about it, your outcomes are going to be a lot better.
Other thoughts?
Oh, yeah. So at the risk of being extremely unpopular, so, you know, I have to put that out there. I really think that I'm going to go back to community involvement. So one of the things that we do very differently, I think, at the National Science Foundation is that I don't perceive that the IT budget is I don't own it. I'm responsible for the stewardship of that budget. But the governance and the decisions about where those dollars are spent is among the people. So we have a very broad and inclusive governance structure. And the people that participate in it voluntarily. They participate in it because they care about the tools that they're using to do their jobs. They make very difficult decisions. We do generic planning, for 2 years out, and specific planning in the year of execution. So that's very contrary. I don't know if any of this makes sense to you guys, but what we do is we put the money in big buckets. We do not promise with abstract business cases how we're going to spend the money 2 years out. We promise what area we will spend the money in. And then in the year of execution, it's the people who take their current problems and determine where we're going to spend that money specifically. That allows us, we don't talk about artificial intelligence. I feel like artificial intelligence is a couple of words that have different meaning to different people. It's scary to some people, it's sexy to other people. That was air quotes. I think that instead we talk about artificial intelligence isn't emerging in the federal government. It's there. It's on your phones. It's in your DevOps. It's in your security systems. So to talk about it as if it's not there is false. So I don't talk about it at all. I say, again, this comes back to the very same thing, which is inclusion. We will be solving our problems with AI because it's out there, because that's the best tool for solving our problems. So,
Any other thoughts on lessons learned?
Yeah, one additional thought, and it's sort of I would say it is almost a backwards thing. So we have a what not to do. So when we were developing our system for what I call sensor flags, I'm not sure if that's the right technical term, but so that based on our cameras and so that we can identify sort of those individuals that we're trying to identify versus animals and other incorrect flags. We found that some of our employees who had been the ones monitoring, they'd been sitting and monitoring the video over time, they were uncomfortable letting go of that. And part of the reason for that was because we hadn't involved them in the process. So it really is the same thing, but it was and as a result, they had a temptation to default back to the manual processes. So they, rather than allowing the AI to do what we had built it to do, because we hadn't built trust with them, they were inclined to just back away from it and default back to doing the work themselves manually, which defeated the purpose. So really for us, it's the same thing everyone else is saying. It's about bringing people into the process, the people who will be the business owners and the end users, to build that trust and confidence in the systems that you're developing. And I think there are a lot of techniques that you can use to do that.
Just stay with that. As an HR professional at two agencies, as the leader in that field, are there best practices or effective ways in terms of thinking about hiring, retention, skill development that you've seen that agencies can adopt in terms of incentivizing agencies to move in that direction, to avoid the not do it?
Well, so there are the obvious things, like you can get, there are awards, there's recognition, there's those types of things. But there also are some unique things like challenges. So you can do the same type of thing. While we've been doing a lot of and promoting challenge.gov, where we open it up to the public, but you can do those same types of activities internally. You can reach out to your workforce and invite them to identify. I mean, the employees are the ones who know what they do. I mean, we all as leaders like to think we know what our employees do on a daily basis, but they really know what they're doing day to day. And to get their suggestions, here's a process that could be automated, or here's a place where I spend a lot of my time and I really don't think that it's value added time, and I would rather be doing that I'm a scientist, and rather than doing, whatever it is I'm doing, I would like to be doing science work. And so reaching out to the workforce to get their ideas for how and when we implement things like this, I think is a good it's a good approach, and it's a good retention type of thing to get their buy-in.
Interesting. So Dorothy, you've talked before about digital literacy as a key input in the space, and you've talked today about your workforce. You also have a grantee universe that is some of the world's most recognized experts in their field, and you have people that benefit from NSF research all the time. Talk about sort of the digital literacy at different levels and how that can help agencies move forward in understanding and using AI.
Well, I would say that one of the things we really worry about is how to ensure that people understand the data and the conclusions that come from the data. And in order to do that, they have to either completely relinquish control, totally trust it, the way I do the mapping programs. I don't question whether or not they're giving me good directions. I just do it. So you can either trust the program completely, and I guess the word is relinquish control to the app, which is not really where we are and not what we want to do. And so I think that what we actually need to do is get people who understand. We need to work to improve people's understanding of what AI does, so that they can trust it generically. and also what their data contains so that they can understand it specifically. And what we're doing right now, we've done some if we sent out a call for people who might be interested in improving their data literacy, and we established a sort of a test to see how we were going to give free training through a company called Udacity. The CIO Council funded this. They funded it for 10 people as an experiment. We sent out a call at the CIO Council to bring in people. And one of the first things we learned was that most people who want to be data scientists don't qualify, or data analysts. I mean, we don't have the skills that we need. So what we're doing next is we're going back and saying, okay, you guys all have an interest, which is the key. What do you or don't you know? And so we're trying to figure out at the basic level, how can we take a person who maybe knows nothing about this and bring them quickly to the place they need to be in order to meet the demands for data literacy. I believe that a lot of people are afraid of things like programming, especially people who have been doing data entry their whole lives or watching a monitor. They feel maybe that they are not capable, and that's absolutely untrue. It's possible we have to start with classes in Boolean logic. Teach people how to trust a computer and what's going on. That's not the generation coming out of schools now. They don't need that. But we have a tremendous, powerful workforce, and we're not really using them to the best of their abilities because we haven't invested in this way.
And Ed, you talked also about data, and of course, as you have a colleague who's the Chief Data Officer. How do you see, in terms of technology and data integration coming together, agencies building their capacity to do what Dorothy described, to leverage data using AI sort of for particular applications as well as for effectiveness and efficiency?
Well, I can speak to HHS. So as many of you know, the Evidence-Based Policy Making Act was just activated, and we now have some OMB guidance around that as well, and that's a fantastic thing. We created in my office the Chief Data Officer role well before the legislation came out, but we were anticipating that this was going to be something that was going to happen because we've seen it in industry for a long time, and it's the right thing to do from a stewardship perspective. And so we have undertaken a few different projects, if you will, around data. So we have an internal data hub project, if you will, which actually started as it started under the last administration, the CTOs under the last administration, starting with the first CTO at HHS, Todd Park, who was very vocal and very correct in saying that we need to liberate data as much as allowed by law and regulation. Because why? Because it belongs to the taxpayers, and it's needed from a transparency perspective. It's needed from a healthcare quality perspective and a cost perspective. We need to get that information out to the research community outside of HHS, and we needed to get it out to the citizenry so that they can begin to make informed decisions about their health care. And we've been on a long journey in liberating data across HHS. We probably have more data than any other civilian agency or department, and sometimes it's super hard to get at that data, and a lot of times folks just assume they're risk averse and they're good stewards of the data, and therefore they assume that a regulation may apply to them, such as HIPAA. When in reality, a lot of the data that isn't being shared it's not necessarily governed by HIPAA. But they're starting with that position of low risk, and that's good. So one of the things that we're doing is helping people understand, while still being good stewards and good owners of the actual databases and data sets, understand the level at which they can share that data. And that's an ongoing process. It's a training process for us, or a learning process that we help people go through. When I started at HHS over 2 years ago, our MO, if you will, was to kind of charm and cajole people to give data sets that could be then synthesized with other data sets that we could get insights. So the opioid crisis is a prime example of that. That only takes you so far. Now what we're doing, and what a lot of other large cabinet level departments are doing, this is what Dana DC is doing at DoD, for instance, is looking at it from a different angle. How can we enable, right? So we've all talked about training and the importance of people being fluent in the language of data and data science and AI. Very important. But how can we also enable and empower folks? So we're looking at a way that we can create an open, industry standard data hub with a set of analytical tools available and a chargeback mechanism, so people can bring their data to this platform and they can compute against that data in a safe, secure, and environment, and an environment that they can control at the end of the day. That's super important. And if they want to give others access to that data, or they want to allow it to be combined with other data sets that are outside of their control, we have a very controlled way to go about that. But there's a stepwise approach. You don't just say, hey, put your data in here and then knock on the door the next day and say, let's open that data up. Right? They have to get used to the idea that they still have control, and they do, and that when a request to share a data set for a mission-based purpose arises, they're still in control. And it's a much different motion, a much different posture that we take with folks across HHS, and we've seen a really good response to that type of emotion.
Great. Did you have?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I've been in conversations also where people are talking about how do we break open the federal data? How do we make it available to people? And one of the ideas that I heard that I thought was very interesting was the notion of creating a synthetic twin. So creating a replica of a data set, of a database that people who are developing artificial intelligence can use to test and validate and create tools, and then without releasing PII or whatever. And really, I'm not sure how to open up, because we all, in fact, you don't know this, but I'm working on a blockchain initiative with NIH. I know. And one of the things...
I'm not anti-blockchain, so you know.
That's okay. I hope someone wrote that down. I think that in working even with NIH, between NSF and NIH, we've been having struggles with how do we, even these two agencies who do very similar things and are friends, well, I think so, share the data. And so I do believe that ways of characterizing the data in such a way that people can share it and use it, it might be a quicker breakthrough. So if any of you are inventors of solutions, please, let's see someone work on that.
Sounds like implementation advice for the U.S. Data Service, which was one of the recommendations coming out of the Evidence-Based Policy Commission report, as a way to make that an operational reality. So one last question, and then we're going to open it up to you all for questions of our fantastic panel. And the last question concerns risk management, which you mentioned bias and ethical considerations, and this was a key topic of the report being released today. If you think about steps that agencies can take to understand risks and manage them so that they can move forward to capture the benefits of AI in terms of transparency, communication, establishing a set of ethical imperatives to follow, what are some practices that you've seen that have worked effectively?
Do you want me to start? I can say that I believe that this is unfortunate. This is a little bit of a pessimistic position, but we're making decisions. Human beings are making decisions based on data sets today. So putting an IT application on top of a bad data set is no different than a human being reviewing that same data set and making a bad decision. So I don't see that as an increased risk. Mm-hmm. And now, you have to know that it can happen faster. And you have to be careful what you build upon that. But to me, the risk is if we are conservative in our approach, then the industry will continue to advance at a quicker and quicker pace and roll over us. So we're competing with two risks. One is the risk of using AI and making bad decisions. But the other risk is getting the government into a position where we can't keep up with providing services for the people. And so I don't know if that's the kind of answer you're looking for, but that is genuinely, I tend to be risk averse and assign the risk to the owner of the program. You have a responsibility when you drive a car to do it safely. So you can choose to use this AI product or not. And if you and so we don't put anything in anyone's hands that we say you must use. We haven't gotten to that point yet. And when that happens, there'll be a different discussion. But so far, we've been able to offer enough options. You can do it manually, or you can use this bot to do it. Which would you prefer? So that's our position.
Sometimes framed as the compared to what problem, right? If you use AI and it improves something by 90%, but there's a small risk, that's maybe a better result than not using it with a lower emission.
Or it comes back to the notion of do you even know if you're using AI? I mean, who knows whether they're using it or not?
Any other thoughts on?
So, we do a lot of science too, and so in basic science, there's this idea of a reproducibility of results. Repeatability of results is where the same team can repeat an experiment and get the same results or very, very close. And then reproducibility is where another team at arm's length, not being biased by the original team and their work, can take the methodologies, the processes, the scientific process that they used and repeat the experiment, if you will, and get the same results, right? It's really, really important, not only for the scientific community, but when we think about data and we call it data science, I think there's a lot of basic science methodology that can inform what we do in data science. And this idea of reproducibility of results is super important, because that's how you get people to understand whether there's bias in the data and bias in the results at the end. And to get there, it's extremely important for us in federal government to continue to put pressure on the government to release data sets and make them available, but also to make sure that when contractors, vendors, and folks, feds inside the government are creating algorithms that may have bias in them, that those are released to the public so that people can reproduce the results of what is being done as much as allowed by privacy, security, and our fiduciary responsibilities. That's how you gain the public's trust, and that's how we all learn. Nothing is perfect in this world, and there's going to be a lot of imperfection. What we don't want to do, to your point.
For me, I'm perfect.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. So
There's an exception that proves every rule.
there you go. But it's again, I think we can learn from basic science. And when I was the CIO, I was insisting when I was reviewing contracts regarding the use of AI type algorithms that they open those up and they become the property of HHS, and therefore they become the property of the American people, and that folks are allowed to see those things and use those things and reuse that code. And that's super important to make sure that we're not amplifying bad data, and we're not amplifying ethical issues or bias issues associated with that data, but that we, as we go, we're self-correcting and doing a better job.
One of the things we learned in the research, the CTO for the Government of Canada spoke with us and spoke about their model of an algorithmic impact assessment, where they looked at risks at different levels and have specific actions that agencies will take based on the risk of applying AI to the particular application. So it's an interesting model to apply that. Any last thoughts before we open it up?
Yeah, just one additional thought. When we talk about risk, there's been a lot of initiative, I will say, over the last maybe year or two. It feels like there's been a lot of interest in risk management sort of as a management philosophy and looking at every decision that we make from a risk perspective. And so one of the things that I would sort of posit is there are risks associated with actions, and there are also risks associated with inactions. And so when we're considering the risk of implementing AI or any other technology or any other decision that we make, we also have to look at the risk of not doing it. And sometimes we only look at the risk of the change and not the risk of not changing.
Excellent point. Okay, so do we have microphones right here? So just raise your hand, and then if you'll just identify who you are, and then go ahead and ask your question. Why don't we start here, and then we'll move kind of this way.
Hi, I'm Todd Rubin.
You could stand up so
yes,
that we can
sorry. My name is Todd Rubin. So Mr. Simcox, you talked about the Evidence Act. I was just wondering if maybe all the panelists can discuss the current efforts in your agencies to implement the Act and the recent OMB guidance.
Sure. We've moved out on that. We have done a lot of work internally. We set up a work group as soon as the bill was signed, and we will be announcing very soon our formal response to the Act. So we have a chief data officer, and we'll be announcing formally the 3 positions that are statutorily required. So yeah, stay tuned.
So the same. I think Ed mentioned earlier that his organization started in anticipation of these changes because they were the right thing to do, and NSF is in that same boat. Maybe a year ago, we put together a data governance group. We have. I used to be the data captain, but because I now have to have a different name, we're calling the chief. I didn't want to be the CDO because I didn't feel like I was expert in that area. But then, so things happen. But so yes. So we've been what the law does is it clarifies the steps we need to do in reporting our progress. It doesn't greatly alter, I would say, what we're doing. But we embrace this act and are delighted by this.
So for us, we're a component within DHS. So DHS will have the lead in implementing that for the department. And at this point, I don't have any insights into that for DHS.
So you talked about data governance, and one way is to think about roles and responsibilities with the chief data officer, the chief technology officer, the CIO, and the new chief evaluation officer in the statute. At a larger agency, at an agency like NSF, which is small, of course, you can have the same person doing those various roles, and that solves the governance problem. Okay, next question. Over here.
Better?
Yes.
Yeah. Charlie Thompson. I had a question about basically the workforce impact. I think in the discussions, there's kind of an implicit assumption that as you reskill individuals, one, that they can actually be trained to do the high value work, as well as they may have an interest in doing it. I'm not sure that I buy that kind of assumption kind of across the board. So I guess my question would be, do you need to start earlier in the process in looking at like the hiring process and changing the mindset from basically today, where we look at what's required to do the job now versus some sort of future model that's what's going to be required to do the job in the future as well as now, plus maybe some ongoing kind of competencies that are going to be important, like accountability or learning or things like that.
Interesting. Andrea, sir?
Sure. Absolutely. So there are, as I said at CBP, there are some, I'm going to say, what we call our frontline positions that have been pulled away and doing some other things, and this is going to allow them to do their mission. But there also are other positions that are going to be impacted in other ways where individuals who have been happily, so I would like to think that our Border Patrol agents want to get back to their law enforcement work. But in some cases, they're going to be people who were happy to be sitting in front of their monitors, or who were happy to be processing paper applications, things like that, who may or may not have the skills or interest in transitioning to those jobs. I think you are correct, and I also think you're right in that in the jobs that are impacted, there are going to be jobs that are impacted, many of them over time, and so it's critical that we do the type of job analysis we would do, looking at how is the job evolving over time, and then what are the skill sets that are necessary for that. So some of the things that that you probably already know is that those core what we tend to call general competencies are the ones that are going to float to the top as being critical. Things like flexibility, problem solving. There's probably going to be more communication as we shift people from backroom processing types of things to allowing them to be frontline, customer-facing positions, there'll probably be a transition to a lot more of those general types of competencies that are needed in the workforce.
Can I add? I think that I use the man who used to deliver ice analogy often in this case, which is that let's say the turn of the last century, that people didn't have refrigerators, people drove trucks and carried ice around, and then refrigerators came around, and maybe that guy became, because of his interest in keeping people's food cold and healthy and stuff, he became a repairman of refrigeration devices, and now of course those repair themselves, so that person's out of a job. But I think that person today might be a yoga instructor. And the reason I use that is because that person cares about people's health, they like doing physical work. So what I believe is that in the future there will be other jobs we haven't imagined yet. So yes, we do need to look at the core competencies for the things that we are doing today, including teamwork. And I think that, but I don't expect, and I think that there's a large segment of the population that won't need to make a change. So if you have 5 years left of your career or 10 years left of your career, you're not going to want to make a major change, although I still would like you to. I think, though, that the people who are in different places in their career are going to be changing jobs more and more often. My children who are entering the workforce now are going to change not just what they do, but how they do it over and over and over through their lives. And I want them to be agile at that. So that's what I want people to be able to understand, that their job is temporary. My job is temporary. You think, every one of our jobs is. We just didn't talk about it that way before. So that's my position on that.
So AI and yoga is the theme for our next report. Anything else to add? Or?
Yeah, just to look at it a little bit differently from a lens of healthcare. A lot of people that work in healthcare have a license, right? It's a regulated industry, and a lot of the folks are licensed. And there's this idea of practicing at the top of your license. And that's what people want to do that are taking care of patients. They want to practice at the top of their license. Unfortunately, because of just kind of the maturity level of a lot of technology that exists within healthcare, people are not practicing at the top of their license, whether it's a nurse tech, and there's an entire kind of ecosystem of folks that are licensed that work in healthcare. I don't see people go away because of automation in the healthcare setting, the hospital setting, the inpatient setting, et cetera. I just don't. I don't see that. In fact, there is a shortage of people, of licensed, qualified people to take care of patients in most communities. What I do see is people being given the opportunity being given back time to actually interact with patients. So if you take that model, and if you ask folks, hey, would you rather take care of a patient, or would you rather nurse a computer? What are they going to say? So if we can figure out how to, you're perfect. If we can figure out how to, I think that goes for a lot of the folks that work in federal government, especially within HHS, because we have a lot of docs, we have a lot of scientists. They want to practice at the top of their field. They don't want to nurse databases and reboot computers and things of that nature. They don't. And so I don't necessarily. There are some repetitive tasks, administrative tasks that will be automated, but I think there's also time for those folks to kind of reskill and retool. I mean, how many times raise your hand if you've had to do that in your career?
What? Learn something new? Learn
something new about technology because it was going to impact your personal job, right? This is you have to be on a lifelong learning journey now if your job has any touch to technology. So
I was an English major before I ran the OMB Technology Policy Office. So there you go. Next question. We have one back here. Okay.
Hi, Julia Skapik, CHIO of Cognitive Medical Systems. I'm also a recovering Fed. I worked with two of the agencies on the panel. I'm a physician informaticist, and one of the things I've learned in my training is that you can add a technology to a bad process, you still have a bad process. So what can you say that your agencies are doing to either require or to supplement work done by technologists with work to fix bad data and bad processes or improve non-optimal processes and data?
I touched on some of the work. I think this idea of peer review to raise quality is super important, and just doing quality checks that naturally are done in the science world. I think that's also important in healthcare proper. So when you talk about health informatics, for instance, that's super important. I also think that there are best practices and standards around curation of data and the constant cleansing of data and so on that are important, and we don't want to lose sight of that. One of the problems that we have in healthcare and in government is we go and we set up a great system, and on day zero the system gets turned on and it works really well, but we forget what's going to happen down the road. We forget about the impact of the data that will be collected into that system and then used for decision making, and we don't care for upfront. We don't care for what we call the O&M, the operating and maintenance or management aspects of that system and the underlying data, and it kind of gets forgotten about or tombstoned, and that's not good. We need to figure out right up front when we're doing these large capital projects, how are we going to operate these? How are we going to pay for the operation of the systems? But then also, how are we going to care for that data? And so from a technologist's perspective, it's incumbent on me and us, if you will, to care for that up front.
Yeah, I would say for years now we've been doing a couple. First off, I think you're absolutely right that when we began in the automation business, we automated paper processes and we didn't adjust the processes, and so as a result, we have a mess. And I think that we are those of us that are in the IT world right now, I believe, know that. We don't want to repeat that same mistake again as we go through this other transformation. So we're aware of it. The other thing that happens is that I've observed is that every time we start to implement a solution, an intelligent solution, it ends up having an immediate repercussion on the system that collects the information. So it's very frustrating to those people because we'll be working over here on a data analytics problem, and we'll have to go back to some legacy system and say, would you mind putting some better controls over this information gathering system over here? And I think it's very important to be able to fund that effort. So one of the things we really do is set aside a portion of what we're funding to say, we know there's going to be collateral damage, let's say, or there's going to be ramifications to other systems that we can't imagine yet. And so as we move forward, we always are aware, and we also inform the larger agency, we're going in this direction, and then they start getting nervous thinking my system's going to be impacted. So again, it's about communication, and it's not perfect. The other thing I do, as you guys know, is I accept a lot of average data because that's what we have. But I don't think accepting an average process is going to happen anymore, at least at NSF, I hope.
So we have time for just a couple more questions. There's one up here.
Good morning. This is an excellent panel. I want to thank you all. It's always inspiring. And it's important to note this date when we're still in charge. Before, suddenly AI, the machines are worrying about us and figuring what to do. Can you imagine the panel 20 years from now? But my question is, when we talked about skill sets, and you all mentioned, I took down 20 skill sets that were mentioned in this panel that are needed. But the one thing I didn't hear, which I think is very important, I just would be curious of your thoughts. I'm a believer in emotional intelligence. And so when we look at skill sets, I'm just wondering, how is that being built in? Because two things. One, when we hire people, we're looking at those skill sets more than ever to be adaptable, flexible, which we know we need. Two, we know also that can also be changed. So you can take courses and actually raise your EQ score. So I'm just wondering, is that something that you see as playing a role in as we adapt the workforce?
So thank you. And Alan, you didn't identify yourself, but I will out you.
Oh.
Alan Shark is the leader of the AI Standing Panel of the National Academy of Public Administration, among many other distinguished fellows. So thank you for your question.
EQ is supremely important to this. And I hopefully it kind of came through in some of my earlier comments about meeting people where they are, understanding their fears, wants, and desires about their jobs, about their roles in an organization, how purpose-driven they are. So there's a higher order conversation that needs to be considered and take place. I mean, I don't think that we spend a lot of time coming right out and saying, when you go in when you go in this type of a setting, you need to have a really high EQ, and we're going to train you on that. And maybe we should be a little bit more diligent about that. But yeah, it's very important to the work. Yeah.
Obviously, I agree that emotional intelligence is one of it's critical, and sort of all the pieces that make up emotional intelligence is sort of a composite. I don't know to what extent it's more critical in an AI sort of environment than it is today. I think, frankly, it's pretty critical today in a lot of our occupations, and sometimes in the federal hiring process, we default to assessing on technical knowledge because it's easier, frankly. And so it's something that's been an underlying challenge to the federal government in our hiring process for a long time. I will actually give a shout out to, back to Charlie Thompson. One of the assessment tools that OPM has developed, USA Hire, includes in its assessment battery some social skill assessments. So it's something that OPM has been looking at in the tools that it provides to other federal agencies, and I think it's something that the federal HR community has been working towards, but it really is, it is much harder than it is to ask someone about their technical knowledge.
Great. So closing sort of lightning round question. If there was one thing that, whether somebody's in an agency or working with an agency, that you think that they could go home today and next week and start to do, what would you advise them to do to get started? What would be a next step in terms of your experience?
I would just say, have the conversation, engage the whole agency. Or whatever level of people you can reach, engage them in the conversation.
I would say make the work about the business and the mission. Don't make it about the technology. You'll be much more successful, and the technology will care for itself at the end.
I would just encourage all of you to be open to change yourselves. We all are here because we're leaning forwards into this, but I think it's critical that we all, as leaders within our own organizations, are open to change and looking for opportunities to move forward.
Well, thank you so much for a fantastic panel discussion. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to everybody here for excellent questions. Thanks again to the partnership for hosting. Please read the report, read other reports as they come out, and we look forward to continuing this dialogue. Thank you very much for coming.